Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Minhajul Abidin, the best way for the seekers of God, by Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali, Rahmatullahi alayhi. Chapter 1, a portrait of the author, compiled by Muhammad Harun. Short biographical sketch. Zainuddin Abu Hamid bin Muhammad al-Ghazali was born in 450 Hijri in the year of 1058 in the village Taberan in the district of Tos in the province of Khorasan in Persia, and he was an Imam, the leader, and this title and his epithet is Hujjatul Islam, meaning the proof of Islam. His father died while he was still young, leaving him under the care of his mother and grandfather. At the time of his death, Imam Ghazali's father entrusted the education of his two sons, Muhammad and Ahmed, to one of his trusted friends. The latter saw to the primary education of the boys, during which they committed the whole Quran to memory in short time, after which they studied Arabic. Subsequently, they were admitted in a free traditional religious school, madrasa. After having acquired the fundamentals of Islamic learning, the young Ghazali left his native village for Zarzan to study under a great learned man, Imam Abu Nasr Ismail. He used to take notes of the lectures of his teacher, but once on journey he was robbed of these along with his other belongings by some dacoits. He went to the chief of the robbers and asked for his notes to be returned to him. Impressed by the courage of the young man, the bandit returned them to him. The next station on his quest for learning was the Nizamiya Madrasa in Naishapur, which was a renowned center of learning, which produced a number of noted scholars. Its principal at that time was great educationist by the name of Imamul Haramain, who had 400 students, and the young Ghazali became very attached to him. When he died, Imam Ghazali was so much grieved at his death that he left Naishapur and went to Baghdad, the capital of the Islamic Empire. At the age of 27, he was initiated to Tasawwuf by a Sufi saint called Abu Ali Farmidi, who was also the spiritual guide of Nizamul Mulk, the chief minister of the Turkish Sultan Malik Shah. At the young age of 33 years, Nizamul Mulk appointed him as lecturer at the Nizamiya Madrasa in Baghdad. By his appointment to such a prestigious post, his fame as a great scholar spread fast and wide, and the rulers, officials, and notables consulted him in state affairs and theological matters. And his lectures were attended by hundreds of people, and among his audience were learned men and dignitaries. The intellectual environment of the capital was a rather cosmopolitan nature, where people of all sects and creeds and schools of thoughts met in one place and used to engage in public debates and mutual wars of argumentation about their beliefs and ideas. This scenario had a catalytic effect in the mind of the Imam, so that his whole life was uprooted and he entered into a phase of skepticism, his orthodox beliefs being shaken by doubts. His sincerity, however, compelled him to keep searching for the truth, and then, when intellectualism failed in him, he eventually returned to Tasawwuf after a terrific spiritual struggle that also took a heavy toll on his physical health. Honesty with himself, the spiritual commitment he had made, and truth he had finally encountered led him to give up his lucrative post at the Nizamiya in Baghdad, to put on the tattered robe of the Sufis, and to leave Baghdad suddenly on one night in 488. He then went to Damascus, and secluded himself in a room in a mosque and spent his time exclusively in worship, meditation, and the recitation of the word of Allah and his remembrance. Thus, he spent here 2 years in solitude. After 2 years, he went to Jerusalem and Palestine, where he visited the holy places, including birthplace of Isa alayhi salam and the shrine of Ibrahim alayhi salam, peace be on both of them. In 499 after Hijrah, he took a vow that he would not go to the court of any ruler. He made a vow that he would not go to the court of any ruler and that he would never accept a present from any of them, and that he would not join any religious debates. He kept these promises for the rest of his life. Then he undertook the pilgrimage to Mecca and also visited Medina, where he extended his stay for a long time. When he returned home, the Sultan requested him to accept the post of principal of the Nizamiya Madrasa, which he accepted. Having travelled as a dervish for over 10 years, he spent most of his time of this second returning at the Nizamiya in reading, writing, and teaching. During that time, he also composed his masterpiece, Ihya Ulumuddin, Revival of the Religious Sciences. When the Sultan was assassinated, he gave up the post and went to Tas, where he retreated to a Khanqa. The new ruler requested the Imam to rejoin his post as the principal, but he declined the offer. On 14th Jamadu Thani, 505 after Hijrah, corresponding to December 19, 1111, he died at his native village Taberan. Ibn Jawzi narrated that Imam got up from his bed early in the morning on that day, which was a Monday, performed his morning prayer, and then sent a man to bring his coffin cloth. When it was brought, he lifted it up to his eyes and said, "The Lord's command must be obeyed." Saying this, he stretched out his legs and breathed his last. Imam Jawzi also reported one of his students asked him to advise him, and he said, "You have to be sincere. Sincerity is the most important thing in learning." The Imam lived to the age of nearly 55 years and he began writing books in his early 20s. He traveled for more than 10 years, and besides teaching and preaching, he wrote nearly 400 books on various subject matters of religion and scholastic nature, and replied thousands of letters which people from far and near sent to him, asking for his legal opinion and advice. The relevance. The works of Imam Ghazali, who apart from his spiritual status as a Sufi and his standing as a religious scholar, was admittedly one of the world's giants of philosophy and psychology, not only predates, but as a matter of fact exceeds in many aspects contemporary scientific and psychological knowledge. In the Middle Ages, his books were burnt by religious fanatics from Spain to Syria. Nowadays, they are not put into the flames, but they are not very widely read anymore, except by the aspirants to the path of Ihsan and people who are seriously interested in the spiritual realities of existences. Even though the contribution of Imam Ghazali to human thought and the timeless relevance of his concepts remain unquestioned, and his work has been appreciated in academic circles of various genres, it has not been given the attention it deserves. The essential reason for this being solely that he disclaims the logical and scientific methods as the source of his knowledge. The essential reason for this being solely that he disclaims the logical and scientific methods as the source of his knowledge, which he arrived at not so much by academic studies, but primarily through his training in tasawwuf, which leads to direct perception of the truth and which is entirely different from the mechanical intellection. Needless to say, this battered him from the club of accepted academic science. Mysticism been given bad name like the dog in the proverb. If it cannot be hanged, it can at least be ignored. This is a measure of scholastic psychology. Accept the man's discoveries if you cannot deny them, but ignore his method if it does not suit your scientific doctrine. The influence of Ghazali on Western thought is generally admitted to be substantial, but the philosophers of medieval Christendom who adopted many of his ideas were selective in doing so. They completely ignore those parts which were embarrassing to their own purposes, or which would have forced them to change their stance had they had the courage to face up the truth in them. Opinion and knowledge are easily confused in the absence of uncompromising sincerity paired with conscientious self-discipline. And Imam Ghazali considered the habit of doing this, which is very common human tendency, like an epidemic disease. Similarly, are information and knowledge often confused with each other? Similarly, information and knowledge often confused with each other. And he always insisted that those who are well read, that is, who have accumulated a lot of information, may nevertheless be, and often are, steeped in ignorance and may be prejudiced and fanatic fools. He affirms that in addition to having information and being able to reproduce it, there is such a thing as knowledge, which is of a higher category. As a matter of fact, it is a ray of light from the divine attribute of knowledge reflected on the hearts of God-fearing men and women. In the same way as a child cannot comprehend the realization of an adult, and an uneducated adult cannot fathom the attainment of a learned man, a mere intellectual or academic is veiled from the enlightened status of the saints or masters. Because of their inability to coming to terms with this fact and due to an intrinsic arrogance, the hierophants of materialistic science have decided to do away with any knowledge that cannot be contained in books. This does not mean that it does not exist. It only makes it more difficult to find, since the above named custodians of learning have trained people not to look for it. On the other hand, the human soul not only has the potential to acquire this knowledge, but has an intrinsic thirst for it. And those people who do not stifle this thirst by giving into gratifying the sensual and mental appetites of their lower self until they have become spiritually totally numb will be found by it because of their sincerity. And God knows best what is true.